Yeah. And that's what you're talking about when you talk about you're really teaching a lifestyle more than anything, right?
Yeah, there's an expression for commitment. Next time you have bacon and eggs for breakfast, the chicken was involved, but the pig was committed. There's a great story about it. A woman's at a pub restaurant. She's playing the piano really well, and a man walks by and says, "I'd do anything." Or how did it goes, I'm missing the punchline. I'd give my life to play like that. I'd give my life to play like that. And she looked up and she said, "I did." So hungry dog hunts best. Tennis players don't get what they deserve, what they get what they expect. Obviously, you're doing so well with Canadian tennis. Now, that wasn't always the case. I would say years ago that the Canadians had an superiority complex in hockey and an inferiority complex in tennis. That's not the case anymore. But tennis players come from everywhere, and it's amazing when you find out the best tennis players in the world come from there's the least amount of court availability. It's really the character. If someone is they don't have all the court time. You don't have to go to Barcelona, Spain to become a great tennis player. I'd say that's number one where people go. Florida's number two now. That the first step out the door is the toughest one. People just need to be action oriented, proactive.
Yep. Okay, next question. This is from Matthew Duncan. Is there one thing you wish young players worked on earlier in their tennis journey?
Well, for sure, the serve. Certainly athleticism, but the serve. Generally, people that are in governing bodies of tennis, you have to thank them. They're so dedicated to contributing to the sport. But most people that are at that level, they've had a background in tennis with a briefcase, not a background in tennis with a ball hopper. And, to get the ball in the box, what most kids do is they put the racket in the pizza position, they pull down. It's very common that people who play tennis the first 5 years, and they have an absolute awful, dreadful service motion, but they're getting to play the game. I spent a lot of time in Russia where you have to train 3,000 hours before you play. Here in the US, it's not learn to play, it's play to learn. So certainly developing athleticism from the get-go, but all strokes. But it's amazing how many kids play for so many years in the very beginning, and they've got the patty cake serve. And they don't know because it's not a liability. Having a bad serve, actually, a few years back, like 5 years ago, we filmed incognito. Kids didn't know they were filmed. We filmed 50 boys and 50 girls at the national 12s here in the US, and over 90% had some version of palm up in their serve. So then what happens, and I think anybody in tennis is aware that people go through the ordeal of having to unlearn. And there's no substitute for a good beginning. So if people can, with all strokes, but especially the serve, it's just unfortunate that kids spend so many years and they don't know it. I tell parents when I film them, coming back to the bluntness, is the light at the end of the tunnel is a train coming right at you. They just don't know because they've got a palm up serve. Their forehand goes 4 feet behind their back. They just don't know. And we do make people stop and think. When Crummy plays crummier, who wins? Crummy beats crummier. But crummy doesn't know they're crummy. It's very dangerous for a young player to compare themselves to the kid on the other side of the net, especially in the early age groups.
Yeah, very true. Okay, next question. This is from Michelle May, Ralph and Michelle. What do you recommend as a practice to play ratio, so matches, tournaments, etc., for a developing junior?
Well, when it comes down to in Canada, especially during the winter months, you have more players on a court. Yeah. It's not as easy to play practice sets because the players are forced indoors. So Vic Edwards coached Yvonne Goolagong, great player from an Aborigine from the Outback, and his formula was 3.5 hours of practice for one set. And a lot of times what happens is in junior development programs, people play, up the river, down the river, you move up, you move down, get a battery of courts together. But a tennis court's 7,200 square feet. I would take an indoor court and I would have all sorts of teaching apparatus, cones and socks and backboards, and I would always have a technical station. But that's where it's so important, especially a kid who's playing a lot of indoor tennis. They have to do so much at home. When a kid goes to an indoor court, they should step on the court and they should be good to go. Many times in an indoor court situation, you have, say 3 courts on this side, 3 courts on this side. There's a big hallway in between. You have to really be creative with indoor space, not only at a tennis club, but at your house. But I think Vic Edwards is on the money. I think it's a 3-to-1 ratio. I think that more practice and less play, but you can't just practice. And also too, is that when people do practice is, every ball is match point. Every ball counts. And it's not a matter like, well, okay, I'm loosey-goosey during practice and everything's hit and giggle. And then you go to the tournament and you're tight. You really want to have people apply pressure, junior players. They need to be applying pressure on themselves all day. And it starts with getting up in the morning and making their bed. That's pressure. It comes down, you got to do this, you got to do that. And if they're going, oh, mom, leave me alone. No, it's like you need to have the discipline to like a kid should never be asked, do you have any homework tonight? They always have homework. Their title is a student athlete. And when it comes down to, we tell people ideally before you get up in the morning, a young junior player with goals is at least do 10 push-ups, 10 burpees, 10 sit-ups before you can go to the bathroom. Just hit the floor, make your bed, hit the floor and go. And it's the first thing they're doing. They're on their phone. Their phone's like their third arm. When a kid gets home, if they're goal-oriented, their phone, when they get home, they should just put the phone on the kitchen counter. What kids really should have is they should just have a flip phone. The kids can do everything on their telephone. I used to ask kids, I want a quote from Winston Churchill. And that years ago, that meant they had to go home and hopefully at their house, and most tennis kids, they have an encyclopedia. They got to look it up. Now they just push a few buttons and they don't have to look it up, write it down. It's like, did that, coach? And it doesn't register. Doesn't register.
Okay, on the fitness side of things, the physical development, do you recommend aerobic versus anaerobic training for the aspiring tennis junior? What would be the ratio of each of these for off-court training?
I was mentioning Mackenzie McDonald's just out here, and he's at a top 60 ranking. And his fitness coach doesn't really have him do that much running. But tennis is it's a marathon of sprints. I do think that most fitness coaches today for juniors, they know the sport is anaerobic, and therefore they don't do any distance running. A kid really should have, even in the cold weather where you live, a kid should at least run 3 miles once a week. Not very far from where the crow flies in central New York, Bill Ayres, he coaches cross country. He has a book called The Amazing Runners. And his program is Spartan and Stoic, and he makes a schedule the year before, and they got to run 10 miles on February 12th. They're going to run 10 miles on February 12th. You got to train a kid mentally. And, from Tim Galloway's book, The Doer and the Teller, self one, self two, you got the angel and you got the devil. Some kid goes out for a distance run, and then you got the angel saying, keep going. The devil's going, stop. So, you definitely need to make sure that you don't overload the anaerobic, because you don't want to have a kid become slow twitch. Tennis is a fast twitch sport, but one, they need to do distance running to become better mentally. I tell kids your lungs should be as big as trash cans. And, I spent a lot of time in Europe, and, to me, there's a comedian, Jeff Foxworthy, here in the US, and he's got a gig where he says, you're a redneck if you're listening to your wedding vows and out of the corner of your eye you can see a football game, you're a redneck. But we have this thing: if you can't string a racket, you're not a tennis player. If you can't do this and you can't do that, college-bound juniors should realize that when they get on a college campus, they're going to have to run a mile for time, and if they don't break a certain time, they won't get to hit a tennis ball. I don't think tennis juniors are really conditioned for college tennis. When you go to college, you're a contract athlete. And, the parents are, their parents are kind of wined and dined, just like the kid during the recruiting process. But once they're there, they're a contract athlete. The kid is 18 years old, and certainly there's going to be communication with the coach. But no, so I would say today that I meet all these kids that come. We have a lot of kids visit us in the course of the year, and I'm not being negative towards their fitness trainers. Their fitness trainers are probably very highly educated and competent, but it's almost like 90% of them should go home and fire their fitness trainer, because they're going to work with a fitness trainer, say twice a week, and it's expensive for what they pay per hour, but they need to buy their own medicine ball. They need to get their own stopwatch. It's what you do on your own. Champions are made when no one's watching. Daniel Coyle, when they're bent over at the waist, gasping for air and dripping in sweat. The body's a built-in gym. I showed some kids the other day film from 1960 PE classes here in the U.S. when John Kennedy was president. Years ago, I mean, a PE coach, they would ask you your mile time before they would ask you your first name. And, it was just like, do push-ups, So, no, I think when players get a little bit older, that's when they can say, okay, I can back off. But if you study the great tennis players, I mean, Roger Federer for the longest time had a difficult time breaking 2 miles in 12 minutes, and he didn't want to do it. And they had to do the same thing. Well, you can't do that. You can't hit ball.
Yeah. All right, next question is from Vaughn. What kept you motivated through the tough times of your career, whether that be as a player or as a coach? And what do you tell your players to keep them motivated during tough times?
Motivation means to move. That's a great definition. There are many definitions to motivation. You pull a horse, you don't push a horse. And, I think expectations, disappointments, you just have to be able to persevere. And I think you got to practice what you preach. And if you're telling kids to get up early, you need to get up early. I mean, really, the coach should be out working the kids. And, the coach should be able to get their hands dirty and do this and do that. I think everybody can get off track a little bit, but when it comes down to, there's just certain things you have to do. I mean, it could be even with nutrition. Say, okay, if you eat it, you'll wear it. When it comes down to it's just like going to the gym. The coaches, I do think that what happens with coaches, they get really wrapped up in their players, and they feel like they've worked all day, and they feel like they've done something for fitness for themselves. And generally they haven't. So I just think, just like you tell the kids, reflective thought, and one needs to maintain a high level of energy. I think some people need to be a lifelong learner, and it's like you're always looking for more ideas. And some people I tell you, okay, you've taught tennis 10 years, but you only have 1 year experience because you've been teaching it 10 years the same way. So I just think to get pumped up, I do think in tennis we should look at other sports. I think even having kids, with in this country, football is now our biggest sport. It used to be baseball. I tell kids all the time is, the fall comes around, you should go behind the high school and watch a couple double sessions. But for me, I think, it's like, well, you're telling your students to read. What have you read? I mean, you just got to keep pushing. You got to keep, you always want to get better. We tell kids, winners are never satisfied, losers are easily gratified. And, you're basically talking to yourself when you're trying to motivate a group of players. You're basically talking to yourself because you got to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for you personally in your career, did you encounter some significant obstacles or lack of motivation or moments of doubt?
Well, I can be a little bit of a wise guy. I mean, people ask me what my job is, and I say I fight ignorance every day. The consumer, typically if people can afford tennis, they're highly intelligent. There's social economic functioning levels. But the consumer doesn't really have consumer knowledge. And I've trained many, many coaches. I set up the first academic program where you get a college degree. So you have the consumer, then you also have the coach, and the coach's product knowledge. And a lot of times the coach doesn't have product knowledge. If there's product knowledge, they should be able to produce. In other words, that kid's, the kid